At some exact moment, one of your ancestors opened their mouth and said the first word a human being had ever spoken. You will never know what it was. Nobody will. Not ever. There's no recording of it, obviously, but here's the stranger part. There's not even a fossil of it, because unlike a bone, a tool, or a footprint, a spoken word doesn't survive. It leaves nothing behind, not one trace, which hands anyone trying to study it a genuinely strange problem. How do you date the birth of something that never once left physical evidence it existed? The answer: stop looking for the word. Go looking for everything sitting around it instead. Start with the body that did the talking. In 1989, in a cave called Kebara, in what's now Israel, historically called Palestine, and at other points, the Jordan district, depending on which period of history you look at before the British Mandate, researchers found a Neanderthal skeleton with something rare still intact. A small, delicate, horseshoe-shaped bone called the hyoid, the same bone sitting in your own throat right now, anchoring your tongue and voice box. It's a thin little scrap of cartilage that barely survives a human lifetime, let alone 50,000 years. But this one had, and when researchers held it up against yours, it looked almost identical. For years, that felt like close to proof. If a Neanderthal's throat matched yours this closely, surely they could speak something close to a real language. Worth being honest about how that claim has aged, though. Later researchers spotted a real problem in the logic. A hyoid bone alone doesn't tell you what a vocal tract can actually do. Soft tissue matters just as much: muscles, cartilage, the exact shape of the throat, and none of that survives in a fossil. Ever. So the hyoid is a genuine clue. It's just not the slam dunk it was once treated as, which meant scientists needed a second, completely different kind of evidence. Not anatomy this time. Genetics. There's a gene called FOXP2, first linked to language through a British family, known in the research as the KE family, where an inherited mutation left multiple members with serious, specific speech and language difficulties. FOXP2 turned out to matter for fine motor control of the mouth and throat, basically the dial that decides how precisely your tongue and lips can move, and for parts of how your brain processes language itself. For a moment, it looked like one tidy answer: a language gene, sitting right there in your DNA. Then, in 2007, in a twist nobody was expecting, a team led by geneticists Van Perbo sequenced FOXP2 out of actual Neanderthal DNA and found the exact same two mutations you carry, which means whatever FOXP2 does for language, Neanderthals almost certainly had it too. So FOXP2 can't be the whole story either. It's necessary by every indication. It's clearly not enough on its own. Something else was still needed to explain why only one branch of that family tree ended up talking the way you do. That's where the newest piece of evidence comes in. In March 2025, MIT News reported on genomic research led by linguist Shigeru Miyagawa and colleagues, who took a completely different approach. Instead of one gene, they looked at a whole set of regulatory genes linked to language. Think of them as factory settings, not the app itself, the switches that decide whether other language and thinking genes even get used, and compared them across modern human populations around the world. Every population they studied, however far apart geographically, carried the exact same underlying language-linked genetic architecture, which tells you something specific: that architecture had to already be in place before those populations split apart and scattered across the planet. Based on when that population split happened, the researchers proposed the capacity for language was already sitting in your ancestors' biology by at least roughly 135,000 years ago. Not necessarily full conversation yet. The underlying capacity for it. The researchers then proposed something more specific still: that actual words, used socially, day to day, likely entered common use somewhat later, around 100,000 years ago. That number lines up with something else in the archaeological record, too. Around that same period, symbolic behavior starts showing up. Deliberately used red ochre pigment, pierced shell beads, worn as ornaments, not tools. Objects that only make sense if the people making them were already communicating meaning to each other, not just surviving. So here's the honest range, rather than the one tidy number people love to quote. The wider research literature generally cites language emerging somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 years ago, a genuinely wide window, because the evidence itself is genuinely indirect. Some researchers push further still, arguing for some form of proto-language reaching back into earlier Homo species entirely, a far more speculative claim, worth naming honestly as exactly that. Speculative. What isn't speculative is the shape of the evidence itself. A near-modern throat bone that raised the right question, then got more complicated. A gene shared with a species that never became you. A genomic signature shared across every population on Earth, pointing to a capacity already built in, long before anyone can prove it got used. None of it hands you the first word. It was never going to. What it hands you instead, something arguably more interesting. A rough shape of when your ancestors' brains and throats became capable of the thing you're doing with this sentence right now, centered somewhere in a window of 1 to 300,000 years, long before there's any way to know what was actually said. You'll never hear that first word, but the capacity for it was sitting in your ancestors, waiting, long before it was ever spoken out loud.
Ah, I understand. Follow, and see you next time. For another thing, you'll never look at the same way again.